Hey everybody, East Coast Pete here. It's my show. Lest we forget, have a look at Pain of Salvation. They are a Swedish prog metal band led by singer-songwriter guitarist Dan Gildenlow, formed in '84. In Eskilstuna, which was named for Saint Eskil, who was stoned by Vikings because he tried to convert them to Christianity. Thor didn't like that. Thunder and lightning. Pain of Salvation is like Opeth in some ways. There are a bunch of genres making up their music: jazz, classical, ethnic, soul, and funk, in a cauldron of heavy metal. The name of the band is meant to indicate a balance, like taking the good with the bad or experiencing a setback on the way to your goal. It's like par for the course. Daniel's first band when he was 11 was called Reality. This band became the youngest ever to win the Rock SM contest. At 18, he changed the name to Pain of Salvation, and in 1991, the next 3 years were spent entering more contests, earning national recognition. Chris, Dan's younger brother, joined, and there were 3 brothers who recorded a demo, which they shopped to record companies, and Fred Hermanson became the band's keyboardist. Johan Langel and Gustav Helm were also on board. And then in 1997, Pain of Salvation began work on their debut LP, Entropia, which was released in Asta by Avalon Records. I said Asta, I meant to say Asia. In '91 in Europe by Inside Out Music, and in South America by Hellion Records. Entropia was described as a breath of fresh air for a genre that was full of self-parody and self-indulgence. The concept story was about a family in a fictional society that is destroyed by war. The title mixes entropy with utopia, and the father fails to protect his family, and a child needs a father, not a soldier. Johan Hallgren replaced Magdic. The new album was 1 hour by the Concrete Lake. Sounds like the Beverly Hillbilly cement pond. If you remember that, you, like me, probably watched too much TV growing up. This album was darker and more complex than Entropia. You usually don't see a metal band shooting for a more jubilant and carefree sound on their second record, so it's about nuclear waste and its effect on the environment. Similar to Lake Karachay in Russia, where nuclear waste was dumped, and then the entire lake was sealed over with concrete, so not like the Beverly Hillbillies. Jed was shooting at some food, and up through the ground come a bubbling crude black gold Texas tea. That's not nuclear fallout. It's not even close. Third album, The Perfect Element Part 1, was released in 2000, and the theme this time is adolescence to adulthood and what it's like to be a tweenager. Critics admired its honesty and straightforward approach while not sacrificing complexity. It's not an easy thing to do. The band continued to appear at Prog Fests, this time in the US alongside Symphony X and Evergrey. Remedy Lane was released in 2002. It was seen as a breakthrough, but I don't see how, since they have been a success from day one. The theme was love, lust, and life, and the band toured with Dream Theater. In 2003, Pain of Salvation recorded an acoustic concert in their hometown before an audience of 80. The recording became 12:5, and it featured drastically rearranged versions of their past recordings. 2003 to 4, they worked on their most ambitious project yet. The live show was presented prior to the album's release, and the show had costume dancers, stage props, screen projections, and a 9-piece orchestra. The theme was God. The album went in 2004. It's called B. The band set up a phone system which they called God's Answering Machine, and the messages were compiled and presented with a calm soundtrack. But it really didn't chart. God's not that popular, I guess. Pain of Salvation boycotted the U.S. during the George W. Bush years. Daniel didn't like being fingerprinted at the point of entry that they were doing with all visitors after the World Trade Center was made into dust by a couple of 747s crashing into them. And then, when Barack Obama was elected, the boycott was lifted. Thanks be to Barry, we got our Brits back, but Chris Gildenlow left the band to live in the Netherlands. Scar Sick was released in 2007. Like with B, reviews were mixed. Simon Anderson was hired as a touring bassist. Dan said that Scar Sick was really the perfect element part 2. The band played in Egypt on the ending themes on the 2 Deaths of Pain of Salvation DVD, featuring a cover of Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. Enough said about that. Simon Anderson left. Per Schellender and Dankerson were touring musicians for the next 3 years, and the next 2 albums were Road Salt 1 and Road Salt 2. The only explanation for the theme on both is that they are non-chronological stories about people on a different paths ending up in different places, but it all made sense. Unlike my show. Johan Hallgren and Fred Hermansen left. Touring bassist Dan Carrison joined as a member, but on keyboards, Gustav Heim returned on bass, and Ragnar Zollberg joined on guitars. 2004, Falling Home was an acoustic album similar to their live album, a rearrangement of the repertoire. Daniel got sick and almost died of an infection. He was forced to miss Transatlantic Live. It's a tour with Transatlantic called the Scope Tour. But Pain of Salvation carried on without him. They planned a new album called The Passing Light of Day, and the theme was about Dan's hospital stays. Talked about a life-threatening streptococcal infection. It is beyond compensation, Sorry, it is beyond comprehension to try to guess what it must be like. Ragnar Zolberg left and John Halgren returned. So here's hoping Dan has a complete recovery. I wish I could tell you this happened, but I don't know. And there are no new albums, so it's either over or it isn't. Sort of like Schrodinger's cat. Thanks for being with me on Lest We Forget. Coming up next, how about Crack the Sky? Yeah, can't wait.